Mourners lined the streets of the British capital, saying their last goodbyes to Queen Elizabeth II. A state funeral service was held earlier today at Westminster Abbey in London. From there, the procession headed to Windsor Castle, where a committal service was held at St. George's Chapel. The Queen will be laid to rest in a private ceremony at the King George VI Memorial Chapel. That will happen at around 8:30 p.m. South African time. For more on this, I'm joined by our correspondent, Olly Barratt, who has an update for us from Windsor. What an extraordinarily historic day, Olly. For me, I think what really stands out are the throngs of people that lined the streets all the way from London all the way to Windsor, without really a break in terms of the numbers, from the cityscape to the lush green fields as you exit on the outskirts of London. I don't know, what were your standout moments of the day?
I think that's right. The Queen was really given a send-off by all of those people gathered in London and then along the route here to Windsor, and then huge crowds as well here in Windsor. Quite early in the day, actually, officials here were putting out messages to say that the Long Walk area, the other side of Windsor Castle where the royal hearse drove up, that they were saying that that area was full. Please don't come to Windsor, they were saying. And people still did come because they wanted to gather here and reflect and try and catch a glimpse of the Queen's motorcade if they could in that procession, but otherwise just gather with other people and pay their respects in different ways here in the town, which the Queen really called home for so many years. In terms of other moments that stand out, I think a lot of people are pointing towards part of the committal service here in Windsor, when we saw really symbolic moments like the crown and the sceptre being removed from the coffin before it was placed into the royal vault, and placed onto the coffin instead the wand of office from the Lord Chamberlain, broken and put on top of the coffin of the Queen before it was lowered into the royal vault. The Lord Chamberlain is essentially the head of the royal household, and in olden times that wand of office would have been used to discipline a naughty member of staff here or there. But what it symbolises was that the Lord Chamberlain is effectively saying that his period of duty for the monarch ends with her being laid to rest. And she's been placed into the royal vault here at St. George's Chapel. But as you were saying, that private burial ceremony, which will take place here later, and the Queen will eventually be buried in the King George VI Memorial Chapel, alongside her late husband, Prince Philip, and also alongside her parents.
Yeah, in fact, talk to me a bit more about the significance of the St. George's Chapel. St. George having been declared by King Edward III as the defender of the royal family, and in particular, Olly, that burial space, because it's the George VI Chapel is a chapel within the St. George's Chapel. Tell me a bit more about the significance of that and the coffin of Prince Philip being moved to be buried next to Queen Elizabeth.
That's right. The Queen commissioned the King George VI Memorial Chapel herself to accommodate the bodies of her own mother and father many decades ago now, and it was where we knew that Prince Philip and the Queen wanted to end up together. And so after Prince Philip's funeral, he's essentially been waiting for the Queen, and now they will be buried in turn finally together in the same place in the King George VI Memorial Chapel, which is essentially a small wing of the St. George's Chapel, the wider building. St. George's Chapel, considered almost like the local parish church for the Queen. It's where she went to service after service over the years. A more personal service here in Windsor than we saw in London at Westminster Abbey. There were various elements of it that were really very personal to the Queen indeed, from music which had been written by a former organist that had actually taught the Queen to play piano when she was growing up, to a hymn that Prince Philip had chosen for his own funeral as well. So those personal elements making it particularly into this committal service here in Windsor, which for the public and for the international public, not just Brits here in the UK, is essentially the final goodbye for the Queen, because, as we were saying, that service later on, the burial service, is a private moment for the family. We won't get huge amounts of detail, I don't think, about exactly what happens in that particular service. The committal service really then the final goodbye.
Yeah, and lastly, Olly, what a moment for the new reality in Britain. King Charles ascending to the throne, Liz Truss just barely 2 weeks in the position, and this massive gathering of world leaders, the likes of which, in fact, the closest comparison being the memorial service for the late Nelson Mandela, which also had 70 heads of government and state, but this was on a much bigger scale.
Yeah, an extraordinary 10 days or so here in the UK, but as you say, also reflecting international diplomacy on a grand scale. And the Nelson Mandela Memorial is frequently mentioned as the only really comparable episode in modern times where you've seen that many dignitaries and foreign leaders from around the world gathering in one place. Liz Truss was only Prime Minister for 2 days with the Queen as her monarch. Of course, the Queen was the person that held that meeting with her at Balmoral, the place that she would die just 2 days later, to essentially ask Liz Truss to form a government and become her last Prime Minister. It's an extraordinary moment of change here in the UK from the perspective of the monarchy, but also the perspective of government as well.
Yeah, all right. Thank you for that update. That's our correspondent, Olly Barratt, live for us from Windsor there at the end of what has been an extraordinary day where history has been made, the end of an era and the closing of a chapter with Queen Elizabeth II's interment at that St. George's Chapel.